Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm McKenna. I'm the owner of Murder by the Book in Houston, Texas, and I'm very excited tonight to be back on here for another virtual event. John's done the events the last couple nights, so I had a couple nights off, but you're going to see me here tonight, and then you're also going to see me here tomorrow afternoon for our event with James Lee Burke and Brian Panowich. That's going to be pretty fun. James Lee Burke is, of course, such a legend that it's always a treat to host him. We also have, for the rest of the month, a very busy virtual event schedule. So you can find out what's coming up at murderbooks.com on our event calendar, or all of our event listings are current through the end of the month on Facebook. And I will be putting all the September events up shortly this weekend so that people know what's happening. We're a little behind on that, but they'll get posted shortly, and they are all up to date also on murderbooks.com. And we do have a pretty cool special ticketed event with signed copies available for Paula Hawkins in conversation with Lee Child at the end of the month. Paula Hawkins, of course, the author of Girl on the Train, and Lee Child, the author of the Jack Reacher books. So we will have signed copies of the new Paula Hawkins, and we are hoping to have a great turnout for her, because we've been supporters of her books for a very long time. As always, if you're interested in more information about the authors for tonight or their books, I've put a link in the comments already where you can read about the authors, their books, and if you are so inclined, order the books from us. And as I always say, don't be shy. There's no such thing as a stupid question. If you have a question, we'll get to those later on in the chat. But please, we love an interactive conversation. So if you have any questions, pop them in the comments on Facebook or in the live chat on YouTube. Okay, so that's enough out of me for right now. Let me get to the stars of the show. We are here tonight to celebrate the publication of The Family Plot by Megan Collins. Hi, Megan. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Thanks so much for being here.
Megan Collins, for having me.
Of course, a pleasure. Megan Collins is the author of Behind the Red Door and The Winter Sister. She's taught creative writing for many years at both the high school and college level, and is the managing editor of Three Elements Literary Review. She lives in Connecticut, and as I said, she's here tonight to talk about her brand new book, The Family Plot. We are also joined by, I'm always happy when there's an author with a new book, but my favorite people are volunteer interviewers. So Kathleen, thank you so much for joining us this evening to interview Megan.
Thanks.
It's nice to see you. Let me do your bio really quickly and I'll let you get to it. Kathleen Barber's first novel, Truth Be Told, formerly titled Are You Sleeping?, has been adapted for television by Reese Witherspoon's Hello Sunshine. Kathleen was raised in Galesburg, Illinois, and is a graduate of the University of Illinois and Northwestern University School of Law. She lives in Washington, D.C. with her husband and son, and her most recent book was Follow Me, and I hope at some point tonight we'll get to hear a little bit about that and what you're working on. But for now, I'm going to let you ladies get to chatting. I'm going to be right here if you need anything, and I'm just going to sit back and enjoy. Have fun.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, McKenna, for having us, and thank you, Megan, for allowing me to interview you. I'm super excited. I think you know how much I loved The Family Plot. So for those of you who are not privy to Megan and my private Twitter DMs, as soon as I finished reading it, I was just like gushing all over her. So I'm really excited to be able to talk to you about it. Do you want to tell the audience kind of in a nutshell what the book's about?
Yes, but first I want to give a quick shout out to your books because I have them right here. So if you don't have Kathleen's book, this is her most recent Follow Me. It's so good, juicy, creepy, delicious. And then I have it from the original title, Are You Sleeping? But it's now Truth Be Told. Also amazing. If you like true crime podcasts, you definitely want to get this book. So that is just to say, I'm such a huge fan of your work. So this is such an honor to me to have you here tonight. So thank you. And so as for The Family Plot, which I also have right here, The Family Plot, sort of the elevator pitch is it's about a true crime obsessed family who gather to bury their patriarch only to discover the remains of their long missing brother already in the grave. And as a little bit more than that, it's about this family. They're named the Lighthouses, and all the children in the family are now adults, but they had a very unusual, sort of disturbing upbringing that they didn't even really know was disturbing. Their mother in particular is obsessed with true crime and stories of murder. So she named each of the children after famous victims of murder. She homeschooled them and included in the curriculum all these true crime stories. She had them do murder reports instead of book reports where they had to write about these true crime stories. They did these honorings for victims of murder. So these children were steeped in true crime their whole life, and now they've grown up and after all kind of going on their own paths. And now that they've returned and they've made this horrifying discovery that the brother that they thought had run away 10 years ago was actually murdered and was for some reason buried in their father's burial plot, future burial plot. And so everybody in the family reacts in really weird ways. The mother, who was always like Miss Murder, is suddenly furiously baking cookies all the time and like trying to be Miss Susie Homemaker, and the children do not understand. The oldest sister, Tate, who's kind of famous for making these crime scene dioramas on Instagram. She starts getting to work on a crime scene diorama of her brother's murder, which is really disturbing to the narrator, Dahlia, understandably. And then their oldest brother, Charlie, who's an actor, his whole reaction is he's going to curate a family murder museum that's supposed to be memorializing their brother and father, but he's inviting the entire island. They live on this island because the people who live there have always thought they were these freaks. They call their house that they live in Murder Mansion because they do not understand their lifestyle. And his whole thing is, we're going to show them that we're just normal people, except he's showing them all the weird artifacts of their childhood and their weird education. So it's not normal. And so Dahlia, the narrator, is really disturbed and unsettled by all these reactions. And so she decides, okay, I'm going to be the one that tries to get to the bottom of what happened to my brother, who is actually her twin, who she spent the last 10 years looking for, thinking he had run away. So she's dealing with losing him and trying to solve his murder at the same time. And throughout all this, there had also been a serial killer who was active on the island for a number of years. And so she's wondering if this is the work of that killer. And so she's trying to go back to those events as well and figure out if there's a connection.
Yeah, there are so many parts about it that I loved. Like, and as you were just giving that, I kept reliving some of my favorite parts. One of my favorite parts, though, honestly, is one of the things that you find out really at the beginning, and you mentioned it just now, was about how the children had these names that were, the Lighthouse children were named after famous murder victims. And so I was really curious as to how you decided which of those murder victims to use. Could you talk a little bit about what the children's names are and how you decided to use those particular ones?
Yeah, thank you. Nobody's asked me that yet, so that's a really great question. And now I'm remembering where they came from, or at least the first one that started it off for me. So Dahlia, and it says it in the very first sentence that she's named after the Black Dahlia, which is a really famous true crime case where the woman was chopped in half, like literally drained of all her blood. The woman who found her thought she was a mannequin there because it's like such a creepy, chilling case that's never really been solved. And the idea for that, I think, stemmed from, I had once had this idea about a character named Dahlia Black, and that she was going to end up getting the same treatment as the Black Dahlia, and that was going to set off another story, but I didn't really have what that other story would be. I just had this character named Dahlia Black. And so when I knew I was going to name them after famous murder victims, I thought again of that Dahlia character, and she's Dahlia Lighthouse here. But so that's where she came from. Charlie, the oldest, is named after the Lindbergh baby who was abducted as a little baby, and then they found him, I think, like a couple months later, and he was obviously dead. But that one, I think like it just, I was just thinking about what are some really, really famous cases that even if you aren't that into true crime that you've heard of. And so that's where I got into that. And I was like, okay, I think like the Lindbergh baby is kind of a big one. And then the sister is named Tate after Sharon Tate, one of the victims of the Manson murders. So since she was also an actress, like that's one that's kind of in the public consciousness, whether or not you follow true crime. And then the brother who is murdered, Dahlia's twin brother, is Andy, named after Andrew Borden, Lizzie Borden's father, who was famously killed with an axe, probably maybe by Lizzie Borden herself. And so that's another one that's like really, really well known, or at least you kind of heard about Lizzie Borden at least. And also in the book, the murder weapon for Andy, the character, is an axe. So there's kind of that callback to his namesake. So, and I actually can't remember if I knew that ahead of time. And so that's what led me to Andy, or if naming him Andy led me to choosing an axe as the murder victim. I mean, as the murder weapon. But yeah, so it was kind of just about trying to find ones that, even if you didn't really know these stories, because there's so many of them, you might have heard of those kind of origins.
Yeah, it was such a creepy detail, but one that I was just totally into from the very beginning. And just a second ago, you mentioned that you weren't sure if you knew Andy was going to be murdered by the axe. And that actually leads into one of the questions that I wanted to ask you. When I was reading the book, I kept thinking that I knew who did it. I mean, like I'm a suspense writer also, so I'm usually pretty good at figuring things out. But I was totally baffled. Every chapter I would get to, I'd be like, yes, I know. And then I'd be like, oh no, I don't know. So you did such a good job of keeping Andy's killer secret and throwing in all these excellent red herrings. And so I was kind of wondering, one, if you knew who Andy's killer was when you started writing the book, or if that was something that kind of like evolved as you wrote. And two, whether you had to like plot out all those red herrings in advance, or whether they came out organically.
I did know who killed him before I started drafting. I had originally thought it was going to be somebody else, and then I was kind of trying to work that out. And a lot of times when I'm trying to work out these early details, I talked to my husband about it, and he kind of was like, I don't think that's the killer. And I was like, what do you know? This isn't your book. Like, it's the killer because I say it's the killer. And then he's like, I think it was maybe X. And I'm like, no, like, how would no? And then that kind of got in my head, and I was like, oh, wait, I like that. And now I can see how that works. And so once that got solidified, then, and this is usually my process, like usually I know the premise, and then I have to figure out the ending, and then kind of go and plug in everything in between. And so as for like all the suspects and red herrings and all that, there actually ended up being more of those when I revised. There were fewer in the first draft, and then one of my editor's main points of feedback was that the investigation side of things needed to kind of come forward more in the story, because before that it was a little bit more interior, and like Dahlia would just have these suspicions that were just more based off of feelings instead of like evidence that was actually coming up. Mm-hmm. And so she was 100% right. And so I started to embed those. I did obviously have some characters that I had deliberately planted to be suspicious and to kind of not even just like throwing the reader off, because they all sort of have a place in the like Lighthouse family history that is important in one way or another. But yeah, so through the revising, then I kind of sharpened those and tried to make the suspects more apparent to Dahlia, I think, even.
Mm-hmm. Cool. One of the things that I also really loved a lot was the setting. I felt like it was just so vivid and so cinematic, from the island that they live on to the murder mansion itself. Like I could just like visualize everything. You did such an excellent job with world building. And it was so vivid that I kind of assumed it was based on a real place. So I didn't know. I want to know if that was true. Is it based on something real or something you made up?
Nope. I mean, there could be some. In the book, it's an island off the coast of Rhode Island, and there could be an island that is like that. But the only ones that I know of and have been to in that area are like Block Island and then places that like are very touristy. And I specifically wanted this one to be not super touristy, although it sort of becomes that way once Tate's Instagram with her dioramas takes off. But yeah, no, it was just completely fictional.
Wow. Okay. That's really cool. Including the house.
Yep.
Awesome. Very, very cool. So you mentioned Tate's dioramas, which were another part that I thought was just, I really liked that. So I was kind of wondering, and I know that you have this really awesome miniature collection. I always just think it's so cool when you share those things on Instagram because I love the miniatures. So I was wondering whether the miniatures were your inspiration for Tate's dioramas or whether that was something else.
So the inspiration for the dioramas was I learned about Frances Glessner Lee's. I always have to look it up every time. It's in the acknowledgements page.
Murder is Her Hobby.
What?
Is that the name of it? Murder is Her Hobby?
No, but is that a book?
No, I thought it was the name of her. I think I saw a show about it, and I think that was the name of the show.
Well, she made these nutshell studies of unexplained deaths, and they were, for anybody who doesn't know, these very intricate crime scenes that she made that had, there would be one in like a kitchen or one in a bedroom or one in a bathroom, and it would have all the clues in it for what happened with the crime, and it was a murder. And then they were used as training for homicide investigators in the 40s. And now like they're on display somewhere, I forget where. But when I learned about that and I looked up the pictures, I was just like so obsessed with it because I have this love for miniatures. So then when I was putting together these characters and I knew they were all going to do something weird and each have their own little strange world that they're existing in, that idea came back to me. And this whole book was sort of like me throwing in everything that I love and am interested in. So like creepy mansion, serial killers, a secluded island, miniatures, like I just all stuffed it in.
Yeah. So I actually have seen those, I forget her name, but whoever's name you just said, the dioramas, they were at the Renwick Gallery in DC where I live, and the name of the show was Murder is Her Hobby, which is where I was getting that from. But yeah, it's very cool. But so I want to know, do you have creepy miniatures in your collection?
I don't have, it's across the room. I can't get it. But my husband just got me as sort of a publication present, it's a house about this big, and he said it's like a 3D printed mansion, and it like looks like the murder mansion from the book. And so if anybody's curious about what it looks like, I posted it earlier this week on my Instagram, which is at Megan Collins Writer. It is so cool. And it's all white. And he was like, I'm going to paint it though. This is like a DIY thing. And I'm going to paint it for you, which was really sweet because it would have been really intricate. But I was like, I don't know if you can do that without ruining it. But I actually like that it's white because it's all like ghostly and kind of reminds me of bone. And so I feel like that's the only creepy thing I have.
I saw the mansion on your Instagram, and I was wondering if you had like, I don't know, little axes or whatever.
I am wearing right now, if you can see it, axe earrings, which cool. Somebody gave me as a gift earlier in the week. They had them made for me for this book, which is so sweet. So yes, and I'm actually going to be featuring these on Mini Monday on Monday.
I will look for it. Those are pretty cool. I like those. So you dedicated the book to the murderinos, and true crime fandom plays a big part in the book. I'm thinking specifically about like Dahlia's friend Greta, who's very into true crime, and the Lighthouse Memorial Museum, which you mentioned earlier. So I want to know whether you're a true crime fan yourself and kind of like how you feel about the true crime phenomena.
I'm definitely a true crime fan myself. I love My Favorite Murder, which is the podcast where I first heard the term murderinos, which is, if people don't know what that is, it's although anybody tuning into Murder by the Book, I feel like maybe knows this, but it's just somebody who is very interested and fascinated with murder and stories of true crime. And so I knew that because I was bringing this true crime aspect into the book, I wanted to really explore like why we have such a fascination with true crime, because I feel like it's really spiked in the last 10 years or so with kind of the more accessible or availability of shows and podcasts and documentaries and things like that. And I had seen some statistic at some point that really fascinated me that like by and large, I don't remember the number, but it was that women are the majority of the fans of true crime. So I really wanted to look at that and think about like, why is that? What do we get out of it? Why do we return to that over and over? And on the flip side of that, on the flip side of like, what does it offer us? What does it give us? How does it maybe hurt us too? And so I wanted to play with that and explore that. And for me, each character in the book kind of represents a different answer to that. And like, just as an example, I know for myself, with all the saturation of true crime that I've done, it makes me feel like everything's sort of a danger. I can't trust anybody. There could be a murderer lurking anywhere. I don't answer my door when it rings because I'm sure it's a murderer. So I made it so that Dahlia, one of her big issues is that she doesn't trust anybody. And the only person she ever trusted was her twin. And now she, of course, has to deal with the fact that he is gone. And can she trust her family? So each character was sort of representing a different part of that. And for me personally, there's a weird sort of comfort in true crime, which seems kind of like an oxymoron because it's so dark and terrible and all these tragedies. But I'm someone with a lot of anxiety, so it just feels kind of validating in a way, like to hear these stories. And it's like, yes, see, like these terrible things do happen. And it's also kind of like that bit of magical thinking, like now if I've heard about this, that can't happen to me, because even though that's not how it works. And also, I just lost my train of thought. Magical thinking. I don't know. I forgot where I was going with that.
Well, it reminds me kind of in a way of one of the ways that the Lighthouse mother said that she was like preparing the children for like the outside world, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, because she's thinking that this is like something that will both emotionally prepare them and possibly like physically prepare them, that they can move more safely through it.
Yeah. One of the other things about the Lighthouse mom, and I guess both the parents, but the mom in particular, that I thought was really interesting was the way that they would do the honoring for the murder victims. And it was super creepy, you know, but it was also kind of lovely in that they were meditating on their lives. So I was wondering whether that came from anything in particular or just thin air.
Yes. Thank you for asking that question, because that's exactly what I was going to say when I just lost my train of thought. So that idea came from it was something I was kind of like looking at in terms of myself and my own consumption of true crime, because there's this thing that people say a lot in that true crime community, which is that like we're telling these stories, we're watching these stories for the sake of the victim, not to glorify the killer. It's not about making the killer any more famous. It's about knowing the stories of the people who were killed so that they are remembered. And like, that sounds really great. And like, I agree with that. That should be how it is. And I want that to be how it is. But at the same time, like, I also know a lot of things about killers, and you can't really, when you're telling those stories about murder victims, you can't really separate it from the stories of the killers. And anytime you see any kind of documentary or listen to a podcast or whatever, they're always getting into the background of the killers. So as much as we say this is about the victims, it's like it is, but it's also we're still giving breath to those killers. So with that, I wanted to explore that a little bit in the book, that the family, the mother at least, and the kids, they think that they are honoring these victims, that they are doing something good for them, that they are remembering them, and they are. But there's also, they had to do murder reports about killers. They had to, so they haven't like fully separated those because you can't really separate them. So I tried to play with that in various ways in the book. And so that's where that idea of they're going to be honoring them and they're going to think this is what we're doing. But if you look at like how things really are, that's not necessarily the case.
Well, I thought it was really interesting. And so, you know, the Lighthouse family has this, or the Lighthouse children have this kind of like strange upbringing. And as they grow older, they have kind of a strange relationship with their parents. And so one of the things that I liked about this book and all of your books is that it's not just like a thriller. It's not just a crime story. It's also a story about family dynamics. And in some ways, a lot of like dysfunctional family dynamics. And so I was wondering what draws you to tell those kind of stories?
Yeah, I mean, I just like love a dysfunctional family story so much.
I do too.
Yeah, I think it's just that there's so many ways to create a messy family, for a family to be messy. And so as a writer, that's really interesting to dig into that. And also, I think the reason why the families in my books keep being like that is because I'm interested in sort of the way our upbringing shapes us in ways that we don't realize, and how that can kind of create blind spots for us, and ways of looking at the world and ways of not seeing what's right in front of us sometimes, which is the case with a lot of my characters. So in wanting to explore that, it just kind of works better to give them a strange and strained upbringing and kind of a tense relationship with the parents. And so that's why that keeps happening, I think. But I never like sit down and I'm never like, I'm going to write another messy family. It just happens.
Yeah, no, I get it. When you started talking, I was thinking of that, like, is that the start of like Anna Karenina? That's like all happy families are alike, yeah. But you know, no, but I liked it. So parents aren't supposed to have like a favorite child, but authors can have favorite children. So I was curious, which of the Lighthouse children is your favorite, and also which was the most fun for you to like kind of like dig into and develop?
I think the answer is the same. I loved Charlie, even though I think he's maybe the hardest to love in the book. And like I've seen a lot of readers say that, like the whole family was unlikable. And for me, I'm like, I don't see them necessarily as unlikable. They're weird and they're different for sure. And like they make a lot of bad decisions. But I guess because I created them, I have a lot of empathy for them and these kids who like had no choice but to be in this upbringing. And so Charlie in particular was my favorite because he's the one who always says the most messed up things in the book. And, just saying these, like, he's very sarcastic and always has to come in with a little quip and has this very dark humor. And so he just like, anytime there was a scene that he was in and everything was really tense, I knew I could just rely on him to say something that would just have this little moment of breaking the tension, but also creating more tension because of how like not the time, Charlie, it was. So that was just really fun to dig into. And I also, I found him to be kind of the most complex for me in creating him. And there were a lot of layers to him that I felt I needed to get to know before I got him right. And but then I also really liked Tate too, because she kind of has this journey in the book where she's doing these crime scene dioramas, and she thinks she's doing it for one reason, but she sort of has this revelation at some point that maybe she's actually been doing this other thing. And so that was fun to write. I really liked writing this whole family. They were just so zany, and that's always fun.
Yeah, I'm so I never read reviews of my own work or of my friends' work. So I had not seen that people thought that the characters were on, like, well, I think they're fabulous. I love them all.
Yay.
So I'm going to ask you a question about the characters that I always actually hate when people ask me. So it's okay if you say you don't want to answer. But if it were a movie, who would you cast as Dahlia and any of the other main characters that kind of like jump out to you?
So I do get asked that question, and I really it's really hard for me to answer that because, and I've been kind of talking about this a bit this week, that I didn't realize this was the case for me until I articulated it this week. But like beyond the general description that I give, like this person has dark hair and dark eyes, this person has light hair and blue eyes, whatever it is, and or any distinguishing feature, the characters, when I see them, it's more just like a vibe in a room or an energy that they have. So I don't see them super clearly enough to be able to know like who would be really great in the role. But I do know, I'm sure you know, on Instagram, Garrett Indeed Reads, and how he always casts books. And I haven't seen him do it yet for the family plot, but every time he's done it for my other two books, I was just like, yes, that is completely perfect. Of course, that's who is playing this person.
Every time I see something that he's posted, I'm always like, when it's a book I've read, I'm like, oh, that's exactly right.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, well, cool. That's really interesting about the vibe. So that makes me kind of curious. When you sit down, this is like a process question. When you sit down to write, do you start with the characters first, or do you start with the plot first, or is it kind of a marriage of the two?
I definitely start with the premise first, and then I think about what character or what set of characters would most benefit from being put in that situation, or who would be most interesting to watch in that situation. And so that's how, like, when I first thought of this premise, it didn't have the true crime family aspect. It was just a family comes to bury one member only to find another member of the family in the grave that they didn't even know was dead. And then, so I was thinking, what kind of family would be most interesting to do that to? And eventually, my true crime interest sort of melded with that. And I thought it would be really interesting to have a family who had grown up with these murder stories and now had one of their own murdered, and how are they going to react to that and all of that. So yeah, the characters for me always kind of spin out from the premise and the plot. But what about you? Because that's a really great question.
I always start with the characters. I mean, so I'm kind of different than you in that the reason that I don't like to get the who would you cast as a character question is because I can see the characters so vividly in my mind. And so nobody is going to be exactly right. So I always start with the characters, and then I'm just like, what can they do to get themselves in trouble? Yeah. Kind of go from there.
That's interesting. So we're kind of doing the same type of process of taking one to lead to the other, but just backwards.
Yeah. If I could ask you another process question, like I actually have a couple of process questions because as another writer, I'm always very interested in them. Are you like a pantser, or are you a plotter? I imagine you're a plotter. You look like a plotter.
Yeah, I'm definitely a plotter. I mean, like as just a person in the world, I always need a plan. I need to know what's going to happen. Like I feel kind of anxious if things are just kind of left up in the air. So it's the same way with drafting. I need to know where I'm going. And then so once I plot out the whole thing, then every time right before I write a chapter, I do kind of a outline for the chapter too. So I'm like constantly outlining before I actually write it. But it kind of sounds like you're a pantser. Is that true?
I'm much more of a pantser. I want to be a plotter.
I want to be a pantser.
I'm a Virgo, and I like organization. But when I actually sit down to write, I'm just like do, and I will make an outline, and I will just go like off in another direction. So, do you have any like specific writing rituals that you enjoy? Like, do you write at a certain time of the day or anything?
Yeah, I've only just now realized that I've been implementing rituals. And I think it was because I had to start, like, I don't know, just lately it was like I couldn't concentrate. And so I would sit down at my desk at 9 and then not really start until like 9:45 because I'm doing whatever. So I now have been lighting a candle. So that's like, okay, you're lighting the candle. You're getting into writing mode. I strung up a thing of Christmas lights over my window. So when I plug those in, I'm like, okay, now the Christmas lights are on. You're settling into this. And then I have a spreadsheet with my word count goals for the day, and then it'll like calculate how much I went over or under. And so I put in my word count goal for the day, and then something I've been doing, which is I got this from the author Laura Hankin, is take my word count goal and then turn it into kind of a to-do list. So if my goal is 500 words, which usually it is because I try to keep it so reasonable so that I do exceed it and then just get to feel great about myself. And it's all just like a mind trick. But so if it's 500 words, I write down on a piece of paper little increments of that. So 100, 200, 300, 400, 500. And then once I get to 100, I'll get to cross that out. And so it feels like I keep accomplishing things, and that keeps me motivated. So once I get that all into place, then I'm like, okay, now I have to do this. But what about you? Do you have rituals?
I don't really have rituals. I did recently get a candle, and it is a special abundance candle. So I light my abundance candle when I'm gonna like start working, and I hope that it brings me abundant creativity. Yes. Usually I like light it, and then my husband comes in, he's like, "What's that smell?" You know, but my writing schedule has been a little thrown off by the pandemic and having like my kids around all the time.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of looking forward to hopefully settling back into a schedule and being able to just sit down with a computer and do my work.
Yeah.
But it kind of sounds like you might be kind of like a clean writer, in that it sounds like you kind of get your words done and you don't have to then throw them all away at the end of the day, which is something that I, as a non-plotter, often have to do. So I'm wondering if that's true.
I mean, I do. What I do is once I finish a chapter, I go back and revise that chapter. So I'm constantly, and also as I'm writing, I'm sort of constantly editing as I go. Like I'll be writing a sentence and then go back a couple paragraphs and tweak some things, and which is also why I can't really write like in a notebook. It has to be on the computer because I just can't like my brain works too fast for me to be like moving all the parts, and it would get so messy I wouldn't be able to read it. But so I think because I'm like constantly editing while I go, that means I have more words at the end of the day that I actually get to keep. But then like sometimes, like there's been a couple times with what I'm working on now that I get to the end of a chapter and I'm like, that didn't feel right at all. And then I have to throw it away and figure out a whole new way to do it. So it really depends.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you are working on now?
Yes. It's about two really, really close sisters-in-law who are basically best friends, and their bond is tested for the first time when the man that connects them, so one of their brothers and the husband of the other, becomes the main suspect in this really high-profile murder. And they're working to get, and also he's in a coma because he got into a car crash, and that's how the police found like some evidence connecting him to the murder in his car. And so the sisters-in-law are convinced someone's setting him up, and they're going to work together to clear his name. But as they start finding out different things, they sort of start interpreting them different ways, to the point where one of them starts to think, I think he might have really done this. And then the reader has to kind of decide who do they think is right of these two women.
That sounds awesome. I can't wait to read that. I think it sounds like we might have some questions from the audience. So McKenna, if you want to take it away.
It's been a great talk. Before we get to the questions from the audience, though, I want to make sure that Kathleen, you get a chance to tell us about your most recent book and maybe what we look forward to seeing from you next.
Okay, yeah, thanks. So my most recent book was called Follow Me. It is about a minor social media influencer who overshares her life and has one particular fan who decides that he wants to follow her offline as well as online. So it was a lot of fun to write, to kind of like dig into those like influencer lifestyles. So it's called Follow Me. I'm not really ready to talk about what I'm working on right now. It's kind of a mess, but it gets less messy every day.
Okay.
But I will mention, if you don't mind, that the second season of Truth Be Told is starting today, and that's based off of my my debut novel, Truth Be Told.
Excellent. Yeah, when you said that with kids at home, writing has been tough, I thought, well, I'm going to set her up, and if she wants to talk about what she's working on, fine, and if not, that's fine too. Okay, so we do have a couple questions. So one specifically for Megan. I'm sorry, this might cover Kathleen just a little when I put it up here, but it'll go away in a second. What was your writing process like? Did you pace yourself, or did the story organically flow? And also, how do you balance the dark subject of your writing with a more steady emotional and mental landscape?
That's a really great question. Thank you. So as far as the writing process, once I had everything plotted out and I knew what the story was going to be, I do, like I was saying before, I try to set really reasonable word count goals for myself, and that really works for me. Because like I said, like it's all a mind game. Just once I hit the 500 or whatever it is, I'm like, yeah, I'm super great and I'm going above my goal. So that like gives me a boost of confidence to keep going above that. And so it was really just, though, like day by day, having those little chunks. And, you know, even if it was just 500 words a day, like that eventually adds up into a novel. And I'm definitely a linear writer. I know some writers sort of jump around from scene to scene throughout the book, but I have to sort of experience each scene in order so that I feel prepared, that I sort of feel like I've gone through it with the characters. So now I can see how they would react in the next scene and so on. And then in terms of balancing the darkness, because this book is super dark, with just like kind of existing in the world and all of that. It's weird because I was writing this book right when the pandemic started last year, and it seems like if I heard that, I would probably guess that it was like a terrible place to go into every day because things were already so scary in the world, and then I'm like writing this super creepy story. But it was actually because the darkness in the book was such a different kind of darkness than the one we were living in. It was actually such an escape for me and helped me to kind of stay balanced in a weird way. But also it really helps that I have a dog, a golden retriever, Maisie. And so basically whenever I'm done writing for the day and writing all the darkness and the tension and all of that, as soon as I see her sweet little face, like it's just, I'm like in a completely different place. And also I find that although I do read a lot of thrillers and suspense, it's really good to also read some lighter genres when you are writing that dark stuff, so that you aren't like constantly like total tension, nail biting feelings all the time.
So I have to interject because I was talking about my potentially barking dog earlier, but her name is Maisie and she is right there. So we have twin dog names, Maisie's, that help us relax at the end of the day. And I shouldn't say it much more in case she wakes up and starts barking at the kids next door. So for both of you, what do you like most about being a writer, and what do you like the least? And let's start with Kathleen.
Okay. What I like most about being a writer is that I get a chance to get these stories out of my head. If I was not a writer, they would just be bouncing around inside my head and probably making me a little bit, let's say a little bit quirky. So before I was published, I was working full-time as a lawyer, and I would just have these stories that were still bouncing around in my head. And sometimes I would just have to close my office door and scribble them out. And I know that there was a second part of the question, and I have forgotten it because I like talking about how much I like being a writer.
Well, what do you like the least?
What do I like the least? Oh, it is both freeing and terrifying to be kind of like my own boss. So, I mean, even when I'm writing to a particular deadline, I have to be the one who's like, now you must go sit in the chair and you must actually do the work. And it's kind of difficult sometimes to self-motivate and to then also kind of like be the cheerleader, to be like, no, what you've written today is not terrible. Just keep going.
Yeah. How about you, Megan? Best and worst about being a writer?
The best thing is, for me, just like being able to play with language all the time and try to make something, try to express something in a way that maybe people haven't heard it before, or in a way that I didn't know I felt about it before. Because a lot of times for me, writing is clarifying my own feelings and experiences for me. Even when I'm writing something like this that I've never come close to experiencing, there's always something in the emotions that the characters go through that is kind of like a metaphor for something I've felt before. So I really love that. And the thing I like least about, the thing is, I feel like any part of the process that I'm in, I'm always like, that's the process. That's the part I like the least. So when I'm drafting, all I want to be doing is revising. And then when I'm revising, I'm like, oh, I want to like start thinking about a shiny new idea. Or when I'm thinking of that idea and trying to put it together, I just want to be writing it. So I guess there's always something, it's good that there's always something good to look forward to. But when you're actually in it, it's just like, you do have those like magical, wonderful moments, but it is so much work. It's really hard. So, so I think it's just that, just always having to grapple with the discomfort of the part that you're in and having to work through that and push through that to get to the next part.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, Susan has a question, and I'm sorry, Megan, you're gonna have to go first on this one, which is gonna be a disadvantage. Or you can alternate. Let's do that. You still have to go first, but then you'll alternate. What 3 writers, living or dead, would you invite to a dinner party? So let's start with Megan, but we'll alternate.
Okay. My first one is very clear to me, Toni Morrison, but I think I would be so intimidated that I would not say anything and I wouldn't be able to eat because I'd just be like, I'm sorry that I made you come here.
Kathleen?
Yeah. Let's see. I'm gonna go with Shirley Jackson because We Have Always Lived in the Castle was like a formative novel for me.
All right, Megan.
I want to just pack this dinner with like my author friends, but I feel like that's like could probably actually happen. So I'm going to pick ones that are not likely to. Why is this so hard? Oh, definitely Sylvia Plath. She's a huge, like, I'm also a poet and my background is in poetry actually. And she is like the #1 influence for me in terms of poetry and just like writing in general. And she was the one who like showed me when I was like 14 years old or something, like what poetry could actually be, because when you're taught in school, in elementary school, it's like all just these really old, like dead white guys. And she was also like a dead white woman at that point, but she just had such a different vantage point and I love her.
Great. Kathleen?
I think I will add Curtis Sittenfeld, who is one of my favorite authors. Not a thriller author, obviously, but her novel Prep really just like, I think is fantastic. I've read it probably more than I've read any of the other novel.
All right, Megan, rounding out your group of three.
Arundhati Roy, who wrote The God of Small Things, which is one of my all-time favorite books. I've read it many times now, and it always is fresh and interesting to me. And I would still feel incredibly intimidated, but I would try to corner her and just be like, tell me all your secrets. Like, how did you create this super amazing book? And why are you so incredible? And I would just gush and gush.
All right, Kathleen.
Yeah, now, I think since I've invited two people that I'm kind of in awe of, I think I should probably invite also one of my real life friends. I'm going to invite Suzanne Park. She was texting me during this, and she writes women's fiction and YA fiction. She is a writing powerhouse. So she's also very funny. She was a stand-up comedian before she became an author. So I'm going to invite Suzanne to help me break the tension.
Great answer. This is also going to be a hard question. I know. Sorry. And I'm going to tell Megan that the answer can't be that Arundhati Roy book. What can you think of a book you wished you had written and why? Kathleen, you're going to draw the short straw and go first this time.
Okay. Yeah. Special Topics and Calamity Physics.
Oh, my answer is another one of hers.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, I love everything about that book from just like the complete weird family dynamics to like the kind of like mystery aspect to like all the illustrations, all the book references. Love that book. So yeah.
Yes. So my answer, and she was also the other author I was thinking of inviting to this dinner, is also a Marisha Pessl book, which is Night Film. And
I almost said that.
That's crazy that we chose the same author.
That is really crazy because no one talks about those books, to be fair. Like when you said Special Topics, I was like, oh my God, I love that book. That's not one that I ever hear anyone talk about. And then the fact that you wanted Night Film, weird.
Night Film is my favorite experience I ever had reading a book. Like, I was just like stuck to the couch. I could not get up. I think I skipped lunch, which has never happened to me because I'm always like, when do I get to eat next? I'm so excited. Like, I just could not stop. And yeah, like same with Special Topics, just so gorgeously written, gorgeously imagined. Oh, so perfect.
Yeah, that was actually my experience reading Special Topics. I got it in a used bookstore when I was on vacation in Thailand, and I was on this beautiful beach, and I was just like sitting there, like turning the pages, like water. Didn't remember to reapply sunscreen. It just read.
Oh my gosh, great answers. And I always love ending an event on genuine enthusiasm for books. I have a back pocket question I always ask, but I can't top that. Y'all are both nerding out over Marissa Petrel books, so that's great. I will say also that I forgot to mention at the beginning, we do have signed book plates and we have some really cool stickers that Megan sent that if you want to order Family Plot, that will be included in your order. Thanks to everyone tuning in and thanks for the great questions. Kathleen, thank you for being our guest interviewer tonight. It was a pleasure to sit back and listen to the two of you talk. You did a wonderful job. And Megan, congratulations on the new book and all best wishes. I'm going to sign us off for the night. Good evening to both of you.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.